Here we go. Since we're talking about you're in Alabama, and I know a lot of my viewers watch reality TV, and one of the most famous Alabamians right now, who's a father that's quite messy in his other personal life, but he's a good dad, is Martell Hope from the show Love and Happiness Huntsville. If you were giving that brother some advice about fatherhood and what it takes, what would that be? If you could speak to him and say, brother, here is what we need from you, what would that be?
It's funny because I've never seen that show.
What? What? Yo, this is Alabama. What other shows do you have? I mean, what?
But it's messy. I would say stop being messy. Be a good co-parent.
What?
What's up, young scholars? It's the DADS Cypher.
Dr. Akande, who would you pick?
I think Spider-Man, because like Clark Kent is kind of behind the scenes getting things done, and I think that's probably more me being behind. Yeah,
because you swing. Well, now I'm gonna say you can't pick Spider-Man because if you're in a rural environment, you wouldn't have a building to swing off of. It was like it's no place to swing. Like, what are you gonna? I would pick somebody who could fly. No, I'm playing.
There are plenty of pine trees I can swing.
I would say this: the personal brand of DADS Cypher has always been one that primarily has focused on urban fathering. Because I was like DADS Cypher, a hip hop guide to fatherhood. But your research is beginning to make me think that it's other voices out there that are not being brought into the spotlight. Your work covers rural fathers, and I want to. My question for you is this: who is the rural Black father? Who is he today? And because when I think of rural, sometimes, and I think sometimes I think of that as back in the day, that type of things. But we know it's a new rural environment and a new rural fatherhood and that sort of thing. So I want to know who is the new rural father? What challenges do they face? And then lastly, why do you think we don't really cover them as much as media?
I think a lot of our studies on fatherhood have been done with urban fathers. And anytime we do studies, they're typically done with urban fathers. So the rural father has kind of been left out of the limelight, so to speak. And in rural communities, there's more challenges. For instance, I had a friend who was saying how he was going to go to Starbucks. Like everybody has a Starbucks. And I was like, no, there's not. Some of these restaurants are not in every community. So for rural fathers, they are more likely going to be underemployed because the job market is just not in rural communities. There's not a lot of companies, and if we're looking at rural fathers who are non-resident fathers who have multiple children with different women, then they may not be able to find a part-time job to supplement having to support multiple households. So there's the challenges. Rural communities sometimes don't have the city funding or the county funding that the urban areas have.
Look at your kids and, you just want better. It gets frustrating. They don't really know the struggle that I go through financially.
Because we tend to pour in more resources to urban communities because we have, bigger businesses there. Right. And what I understand about the community that I live in, it was hard for them to get a target, and they actually had to combine two communities who both of the communities are in the same county. So a lot of people don't understand that, like, if you don't have more than 100,000 people in your city, there's companies that just will not come because they have to be assured that you have the resources from your community to support whatever it is they're selling. And so those are some of the challenges. Housing is a challenge as well.
We had water damage. Like they said, we had a pipe that was in the wall that was loose.
So in some rural communities, you don't see, a lot of, new or improved housing initiatives. And if they need public assistance, even if it's a single father with a child, a lot of the public housing is primarily women are living in those houses, women and their children. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of unique challenges. And I think when you're looking at financial advisement, for rural fathers, we don't have community initiatives about, how to manage your finances.
I knew the predatory run was back then. I had the family take care of too.
And again, I'll go back to if you have multiple children in different households, how do you support 3 and 4 households financially? And I think that's something that we need to talk to our kids about as well, the young people, that when you're dating, you have to think about these things. That if you have children by different people, you're going to have to think about in your future, how are you going to support these kids? And then we look at some of these dads as deadbeat dads, but it's hard to manage, 2 and 3 different households when your money is going out in, 2, 3, 4 different directions. So, it's just, it's a lot of issues and challenges.
I was under the impression that rural fathers had had gainful employment through like farming and that sort of thing, because that's the stereotype that usually you see that. So what you're saying is like it's even economic deserts in these rural communities as well. Wow. What about food? Are there food deserts too? So what are the main differences? Are there any differences rather between urban and rural fathers?
Yes, there are food deserts as well. There's some communities that they don't have grocery stores. We have an initiative in Alabama and it's going on across the country, where some of the convenience stores are starting to sell healthier choices of food, bananas, apples, things of that nature. And then when you look at some of the mom and pop stores, they're very expensive. And so, you have to pay a higher cost for that. And then there could be a lack of transportation, because in a lot of the rural areas, if you don't have a car, you can't get back and forth to the store. And places, it may take you maybe 3 or 4 miles before you even have a gas station. So depending on where you live, the resources are not there. So if your car breaks down and, you're driving, 20 minutes to work, well, you may not have AAA who can come out, to your area, because there are some of when you're talking about farmers, there are some families where they have generations living in the same area, but there's not a local store. So I think sometimes we forget about that when we're in urban areas. There's not a bus that you can come and, just jump on the bus and take you to work or whatever. And so if you have to, like I said, if you have to commute, 30 miles or more, some people may commute an hour or an hour and a half, to earn, a livable wage. We forget that sometimes.
who is the voice for rural fatherhood? Because, you know, like usually with hip hop, I could hear the urban father story through the music and that sort of thing. So where can we hear or find out more about rural fathers? How do help me, people like myself, out to find out, like, what are they? How do we find out who they are and their stories?
I think we need to have them on your show.
Okay.
Talk about why you're a rural father. You know, because we know what it's like to live in urban areas, but you know, what is it like living in Opelika, Alabama, or Berea, Kentucky, you know, or Starkville, Mississippi? You know, what is it like to live in some of those communities?
It's funny you mentioned Starksville, Mississippi. That's where my family is originally from. Starksville, Mississippi, okay. In the house. Okay, cool. I didn't think anybody knew. I'm like, man, nobody has ever heard of Starksville.
Yeah. Very, very isolated. Wow. And so, you know, in any rural community, like I said, people are going to have to travel, you know, to get a job. If they want to have maybe above minimum wage, because like I said, there's in a lot of communities, there's just not the industry there. And then if you look at, you know, I work with reentry fathers, so fathers who are coming out of prison. You know, if you can't find a job, you're going to be in violation of your parole or probation. And also, if you can't find a job, you can't take care of your kids, and there's not a lot of mental health, as Latrice was talking about. There's a lot of people that travel to find a therapist, and we know that usually therapy goes from maybe 8 in the morning to 6 in the evening. So, you know, there are limited therapists, you know, in these areas. There's limited substance abuse counselors. Sometimes there's even medical deserts. So there may not be a medical facility that's close to you. And so we have a lot of work to do in rural communities. Sometimes there's no sidewalks. And so it's not safe. It's not safe to walk. There's a lot of neighborhoods here that do not have sidewalks. And
mind blowing.
And that was one thing that I noticed when I moved to Starkville, that I was like, where are the sidewalks? And so if you can't have a safe place to walk, there's a lot of fire ants in the grass here. So, you know, we don't.
I thought that was something fictional on TV, like really fire. Wow. I'm sorry, I'm so ignorant. I'm an ignorant urbanite. Sorry. But wow.
Yeah. You know, when you live in the city, you have sidewalks, you have buses, you have taxi cabs. You know, there may not be an Uber, and Uber is very expensive here because there's not a lot of Ubers. And also, you're talking about Ubering maybe 5 to 10 miles, not just from one block to the next block.
Wow, and those be country miles too, because when I went to Starksville one time for a funeral, I was like, Grandma, they said it was 1 mile. We've been on here for 30 minutes.
Instagram and Twitter, and I'm the Father Scholar. That's my name on both of those.
Oh, that's dope. I like that. The Father Scholar. And you gotta say that with your chest. You gotta say that like hardcore. That's dope. The Father Scholar. Yeah. Okay, go right ahead.
And so I'm very much interested in reentry. So anyone out there who is doing work in reentry, I would love to connect with you. I'm very interested in creating a successful pathway for fathers who are coming out of prison, and for fathers who have non-resident children. I'm very interested in that. So find me on Twitter. You can always find me at auburn.edu on our website.
Okay.
What's up, young scholars?